What if I told you I know someone who hasn't eaten dinner in years?
What the hell did you just say?
Instead, they opt to consume their meals in strategic feeding windows, typically ending by 2 p.m., and use dinner time to, well, film odd, weird, highly sarcastic health and longevity YouTubes. Weird, right? And unconventional. But new data may have just made it a little more conventional. Which, now that I think of it, wouldn't be as cool, would it? Yo, what is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftandbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic manner. Now, I have a confession to make.
There's been a murder in Savannah.
No, Michael, can you let me run with this one? Thank you. Overbearing boss. That person who canceled dinner is me. And even though I am totally anti-cancer culture, I am, in fact, pro-cellular and metabolic health culture. So for the last 3 years or so, I've been quietly observing, tracking, and documenting how early eating has impacted and have won me. And I'll just say, there's a reason I'm still doing it. The primary one being a hedge against morbidity, or the state of being diseased, a pressing problem across modern day society. But here's the thing. To date, there's only been a handful of studies that highlight its cellular and metabolic boosting benefits, all of which, might I add, we've covered and I'll link below. But there's been a commonality across many of these studies. Typically, they have small sample size and they focus on a population of metabolically sick individuals, not rather healthy ones striving to extend their health span or healthy years of life. Well, I got good news for you. We got some new data analyzing how early time-restricted feeding compares to midday time-restricted feeding in healthy individuals. So let's embark on today's longevity journey. First, defining what exactly time-restricted feeding and early time-restricted feeding are, then analyzing this new randomized control human data, and finally talking about some strategies that can be leveraged to shift your feeding window. You know, if you're trying to alter that internal vibe. Because we all know those trillions of gut microbes will stay up all night clubbing if we let them. P.S. This study analyzed gut diversity changes as well. I know. Okay. Regain composure. Let's talk early eating. What's the deal with early eating? And to tackle this, let's start with meal timing in general. Modern research has pegged a strategic meal timing protocol, otherwise known as time-restricted feeding, as one of the most promising health span and longevity boosting interventions available to the masses, with data suggesting improvements in cellular and metabolic health, as well as the upregulation of different key longevity pathways. But what exactly is it? At a high level, this is not the practice of limiting what or how much you eat, although those things are important. Time-restricted feeding is a framework in which you consume all of your energy intake into daily strategic windows. Windows typically lasting anywhere between 4 to 12 hours, depending on the protocol, which is a rather large window, and one of the reasons why solid comparative data is hard to come by, especially when we factor in other critical variables such as type of food, stress levels, exercise, environment, and sleep quality, just to name a few. In fact, there happens to be so much to talk about here. We have 50 plus videos on the Growing Fasting 101 playlist that does just that, but I digress. All of that being said, human studies have indicated that time-restricted feeding, or TRF, can induce beneficial responses including weight loss, increase in insulin sensitivity, reduction in blood pressure, and regulate many other metabolic pathways. All, might I add, with one very important thing: no serious side effects. Results that can simply not be ignored. Now, early time-restricted feeding, or ETRF, adds a interesting yet simple twist to all of this. This is the practice of positioning your feeding window earlier in the day rather than later in the evening. And the data to date, like I said earlier, although preliminary, is super interesting, highlighting noticeable improvements in 24-hour glucose, insulin, insulin sensitivity, markers for oxidative stress, and circadian clock gene expression. Hinting, key word here, that we humans and our pretty cool meat suit may be operating more efficiently when we consume our larger meals earlier in the day rather than accepting the societal status quo of big dinners and their accompanying food comas. But like I said, these studies have been mainly assessing metabolically sick individuals, not healthy ones. However, this latest data on the topic changes that. The new ETRF data. For this one, researchers conducted a 5-week randomized trial to assess the difference between two different TRF regimens on healthy, non-obese individuals. The two regimens were midday time-restricted feeding and early time-restricted feeding. And here's how they structured it. 90 participants were randomized to either the early group, the midday group, or a control group. The two TRF groups followed a 16-8 feeding protocol, 8 hours of feeding, 16 hours of fasting per day, where the early group consumed their meals between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m., and the regular or midday TRF group between 11 a.m. and 8 p.m., while the control group, just did whatever they wanted.
I never know what she's doing back there.
Talk about a dream job. Now, in an effort to mimic humans in real-life situations, there were no dietary limitations. People ate what they wanted, but did so in the prescribed feeding window. And for this study, the primary outcome or metric that researchers were tracking was insulin resistance, or what is thought to be one of the first silent things that goes metabolically wrong when one begins to stumble down the path of metabolic syndrome, a topic we cover in depth here. They also evaluated fasting glucose, cholesterol, energy intake, inflammation, circadian clock genes, and microbiome diversity. And you gotta know that last one makes me smile, since we just covered how biodiversity is linked to longevity in this recent video here. It is also important to know that researchers that assessed this outcome were blinded to the data, meaning they did not know what participants were in each group to try to filter out any potential biases. So I know you're dying to hear, as am I, what the hell happened. First, the primary outcome. Although both TRF groups saw improvements in insulin sensitivity, researchers found that early TRF was associated with larger improvements than regular midday TRF. Here's where it gets more interesting. They observed that early TRF, but not regular TRF, was associated with lower fasting plasma glucose, body mass, adiposity, and inflammation. A straight up sweep. All right. But I bet there was no difference in there. Oh, what? Oh, there was? The early TRF group showed a more diverse microbiome compared to the regular TRF and control groups? Well, that's cool. They also saw that both TRF groups had unique impacts on different circadian clock genes, with the early group seeing more ideal expression in key genes such as SIRT1 and PER1. Markers for longevity liability: number 1, inflammation, specifically TNF-alpha and IL-8, were also reduced to a greater degree in the early TRF group. And there was no significant change throughout the 5 weeks in blood pressure and cholesterol, probably because the participants were already healthy. And I gotta say, all this is pretty interesting, right? But could it all be due to, something simple like change in energy intake? Well, it just so happens that both TRF groups saw similar reductions in total energy intake compared to the controls, which implies two things. Number 1, that energy intake could be decreased just by shortening the daily duration of food consumption. Cool. And secondly, that the differences in improvements in metabolic health markers were not caused by a difference in energy intake. All in all, taken together, researchers concluded that these findings suggest that time-restricted feeding with a window for food consumption earlier in the day is better for metabolic health than a window later in the day, and that the mechanisms may very well involve a change to daily rhythms, or that circadian alignment thing that we talk about in so many of our videos. Now, just like any single piece of research, we need to apply perspective. As always, there are limitations that warrant a wider and broader future study, but these results have certainly paved a solid foundation to build on, and have helped me confirm that I am not completely totally crazy yet. So by now, if you are noodling on how to incorporate some early eating, or TRF in general, into your life, let's talk about some tactical strategies. How to eat earlier. As we talked about a lot on many of the fasting focus videos on this channel, consistent meal timing is proving to be one of the most powerful things that we can do to get our health back in line, or keep it in line. And conveniently, it's one of the most doable interventions to start out with. Think about it, no crazy exercise protocol, no crazy dietary restriction, just consuming your meals in a consistent strategic window. This simple structure is thought to better align us intelligent walking apes with the way that we've eaten throughout hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. Eating when it was light out, when we could hunt and scavenge food, not waiting to indulge on some ice cream right before bed. And to reinforce this, the evidence slowly continues to mount that we are better equipped to digest and metabolize our food during the day. And as we've reviewed in videos such as this one, this way of eating probably leads to better, higher quality, more efficient sleep. And before you get overwhelmed, the good news here is there is no generic standard protocol that needs to be followed. The perfect protocol is always the one that you can continuously sustain. In fact, that's the most important component. So here are a few guidelines to help you get started. First, as always, baseline yourself. Observe your current eating habits. Most importantly, when you start and when you finish consuming anything with caloric value.
Is butter a carb?
Next, try and identify a feeding window, 12 hours or less, ideally 10 hours or less, during the day that fits into your schedule, aka something that you would be capable of following every single day. Yes, even on the weekends. A standard simple protocol is something like 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is a 14-10. 14 hours of fasting, 10 hours of feeding. At this point, if you want to try and start eating earlier, begin to shave off 30 minutes from the end of your feeding window every week or 2 weeks until you've reached your ideal window. And I would loosely say if you have a normal sleep-wake cycle, typically get into bed by 11 p.m., most early windows should try and close by 5 p.m. at the latest. But in my own opinion, it would ideally be somewhere around 3 p.m. Another good guideline, especially if you're scripting your protocol from scratch, is to aim to finish all of your energy consumption around 3 hours before bed. This will help you optimize that other key component of health and longevity, sleep quality. But don't forget, sustainability is the most important piece of this puzzle. So ease into it. Move slowly. Remember, we're playing the long game here. We also gotta be realistic, and we cannot overlook that dinner is often the only opportunity throughout the day where friends and family can sit down and actually relax together. So exploring and adjusting to fit your unique lifestyle variables is critical. You may end up with a protocol where you eat early several days of the week and then flex a little later to accommodate some other days of the week. Find what works for you. Know that one day of eating later isn't going to metabolically break you. But I will say, after a little while of eating earlier, you will most likely feel the difference when you eat later. I like to call it the food hangover the next day. No alcohol involved, just eating late, waking up feeling kind of drowsy and tired. And adding on to that, you will likely see it as well, objectively, if you measure things like sleep data in your heart rate variability, and overall sleep quality. Things we touch on in this video here. So go be your own N of 1 experiment safely and find your perfect protocol. And if you have any pre-existing conditions, always talk to your doctor first. Oh, And if you're not where you want to be, you can join our weekly longevity challenges in Patreon, where we as a team implement longevity-focused change week by week, habit by habit, focusing on getting healthy from the inside out. All the links you need for that will be in the description below. At the end of the day, all this really is just another potential way to tap into your best biological self and pay tribute to the old adage, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. They were pretty smart back then, weren't they? They did, however, forget to mention, be as sarcastic as the jester. So chill out, relax, you're doing great. No, that wasn't sarcasm, that was genuine. Who's writing these lines? Wait a sec, doesn't the jester get